So the paper is about the different kinds of moves that people make in their careers and trying to understand the differences between them. So obviously, these days, most people in their careers, sometimes they move jobs inside firms, they get a promotion, maybe they move to a different function. A lot of times, obviously, people move across firms as well. And so what we look at is, do those moves have different kinds of effects? Is it pretty much the same? So you move to a job, doesn't really matter if it's in the same company or a different one. Or is it that you're really doing quite different things when you move jobs inside firms versus across them? And so that's the basic goal of the paper. We looked at it. So we did a survey a few years ago of our alumni here at Wharton and asked them about all of the jobs that they had held. And we used that to kind of disentangle which are the jobs that to disentangle when did they move jobs inside organizations, when did they move across, and what happened to them when they made those moves. So we found quite big differences between the moves that took place inside the firms and the moves that took place across the firms. When people were moving inside firms, we saw they got a pay raise. They also got quite big increase in responsibilities. So they tended to rise up in terms of their title, and they pretty much doubled the number of people that they were managing. When people moved jobs across firms, they also got a pay raise. But it didn't tend to come with an increase in responsibilities. Instead, they were moving to a job with often a similar title and usually with the same number of subordinates, managing the same number of people. And so they weren't necessarily getting a promotion in the same way. And so we saw, it kind of talks to different reasons for moving. So when people are moving inside, it's, they're moving up the ladder. When people are moving to jobs in other firms, they're getting a pay raise, they get paid to move, but they're not making the same kind of move up the ladder. They're moving to a similar rung, albeit in a different organization. I think I was impressed by how stark the differences were between the internal and the external moves. So I had a sense from prior research that probably a reasonable proportion of moves between firms are in effect lateral. The idea there being that employers know the people who work for them. And so they have a sense that they're doing good work and they're prepared to promote them if they're doing well. Obviously, we don't know the people in other organizations. And so it may often be that we feel a lot more comfortable bringing somebody who's really shown that they can do that job somewhere else. And so there was a sense that we'd see quite a lot of hiring being lateral. The extent to which those moves were kind of overwhelmingly lateral, I think, surprised me. So kind of just the sheer scale of the differences between internal and external. I think they have implications on both the part of, obviously, people pursuing their careers and certainly employers. I mean, one of the things we found, so like I said, when people move jobs, they get a pay raise. We also looked at how much people were being paid at the time of the survey and how that related to the kinds of moves they've made. We found that the more times that somebody had moved inside an organization, the more pay they were receiving. And that kind of makes sense. These are largely promotions. You're getting up to the next ladder. The more promotions you've had, we expect the more you should be paid. It turned out the number of times they've moved across firms didn't predict pay at all. So it wasn't that they were bad moves, but they weren't good either. And I think what's going on there is, when you move across firms, you get a pay raise, maybe 20%, something like that. But what you do is you delay your time often to the next promotion. And so the trade-off there is a little more complicated. And so, it does suggest that internal moves are quite important in moving ahead in your career. So that's not saying don't move externally. We don't see a penalty for moving externally. But it does say, I think, as people think about their careers, they want at various stages to be able to kind of be promoted, to move up the ladder inside organizations. And so I get a bit nervous when people tell me about their career plan. I'm going to go to this job. There's not a lot of headroom, but I'll get great experience and I'll use that experience to get hired into a higher level job somewhere else. That turns out to be quite a hard transition to make. And so I think finding a job where there is room to grow inside the organization, you may not want to stay at that organization forever, but at least get a rung or two up the ladder, enabling you to move out to a higher rung elsewhere. I think that seems like a smarter career strategy. On the employer side, again, they're kind of, I think reiterated something I found in my prior work, which was that when you're hiring from outside, you have to pay a lot, right? Because you have to pay whatever somebody was getting doing the same job somewhere else, plus maybe 20% in order to get them to move. And so, again, that makes moving people internally seem a lot cheaper. I mean, I don't think there's been a great deal of work really trying to evaluate these kind of internal and external moves. I think two or three things that were nice about what we were able to do with this survey. We were able to capture all the times people have moved inside organizations. I think a lot of times when people have tried to look at this in the past, using some of the kind of big survey data, they've had to use fairly weak measures of moves, like if somebody changed occupation or something like that. We're able to just ask them about all of the job moves that they had. Second nice thing, I think often in these surveys, particularly when people are trying to understand the extent of external mobility, there's always a question about, we know that being laid off is very bad, and so you really have to untangle voluntary moves from the involuntary. We're able to do that reasonably well in a way that other research probably hasn't. I think the biggest difference, or the one that I found most valuable, was really getting a good measure of what people were doing in each of these jobs. So I particularly like knowing these managerial jobs, how many people you manage is a reasonable measure of responsibility. So having that in each job and really being able to look at how that changes as people move jobs, I think gave us an ability to really advance on prior literature by understanding what's going on during these moves. I think one of the areas that we're looking at in detail is trying to get a sense of some of the more specific paths that people follow as they move across organizations. And so one of the things that I've been very interested in is where do people start their careers and where do they move to subsequently? And one of the interesting things you see with this population is there's a fairly small group of organizations that people tend to move into for their first jobs. Limited number of investment banks, consulting firms, big corporates. They hire a lot of these MBAs, and then afterwards the MBAs go off to a wide variety of different organizations. And so getting a better sense on why they're doing that, how that fits in with firm strategies is something I'm very interested in. Another thing I think that a lot of people have asked me about this study is about the differences between men and women. Somewhat surprisingly, we actually see kind of similar effects in terms of internal and external moves for both men and women. So that doesn't seem to be generating differences in how men and women do in this sample. Nonetheless, there are big differences, and so women end up earning substantially less. And I think one of the other questions we're interested in, what are some of the industries that are more female friendly and why? And what are some of the places and career paths that particularly seem to penalize women in this sample?